Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Ghost of Tsushima on PS4. Here in what we call the West, especially in nerd or geek culture, we have been obsessed with the concept of the samurai warrior for decades. The image of a stoic combatant, at one with his weapon, calm in the heart of chaos, delivering fatal strike after fatal strike is to many who feel disempowered by the society in which they live, the ultimate in cool. Much the same way the James Dean Rebel Without a Cause concept made those in a generation or two before feel cool. The concept of cool made a big impact of West, and we have incorporated it, with varying degrees of success and accuracy, into our own pop culture. Let's look into that as we discuss 2020's Ghost of Tsushima. While there is little disagreement that many find the aesthetics of the samurai cool, what exactly is a samurai and why are they so significant? There is no way for me to accurately retell the history of a hereditary military class in service to the leaders of Japan from the 12th through the 19th centuries in a review/discussion of a video game. So I'll be giving the Cliff's Notes, or if you were young and didn't know that there was a thing that happened before you were born, Spark Notes version of samurai history. Excuse me while I put on my history teacher hat. After centuries of war, invasion, and adopting the Chinese Tang dynasty law and political structure, reforming and disbanding of the military under successive leaders. In the late 1100s, the government of Japan at the time decided to draft a military and consolidate power into defending wealthy families and prime cuts of land against rebellions and small despots seeking to gain station in the country. These magistrates who ran these army divisions were meant to be short term, but when their terms ended, they returned to the capital and their sons inherited their positions, which led to a rise in military and economic power. These early samurai were key to two back-to-back rebellions, and the greatest among them, Taira no Kiyomori, began to advise the emperor directly on military matters, and even had the women of his clan marry successive emperors to control them directly. Kiyomori was later defeated by Minamoto no Yoritomo in 1185 and established the Kamakura shogunate, establishing the power of the samurai over the aristocracy, and making it so that samurai were both police, military, and tax collectors, eventually codifying into law that samurai could kill any peasant they liked in certain situations, in addition to being disallowed to interfere with the ruling power and methods of government officials, as well as starting the classic look of what we would come to know as samurai armor, and the wearing of weapon and armor as a tool and badge of office. The introduction of Zen Buddhism during this time restructured the standards of conduct of the samurai, particularly to overcome the fear of killing and dying. All said, the samurai became the ruling political power of the land during this period. It is during the Kamakura period, where the actual Mongol invasion of Japan occurs, that influences Ghost of Tsushima, but we will get to that in a bit. However, outside of two Mongol invasions, much of the military history of Japan, and therefore the samurai warrior, is tied to putting down rebellions. Also, the title of samurai warrior was an inherited position, so sons of military lords were the only ones who could hold the title, and other conscripts were merely foot soldiers. However, this constant state of rebellion and war got quite bad during the Sengoku period, starting in 1477 and lasting well into the 1600s, where different lords and petty tyrants fought each other with their clans and private armies for dominance. It would be during this time that the first true outsiders to the region, the Portuguese, would arrive and introduce matchlock firearms and would begin to turn the tide against the traditional military structure the samurai inherited and inhabited, as well as the introduction of the now famous katana to deal with close combat and the heavier armor designed during the Sengoku or Warring States period. This was also the time when the rules around who could be samurai were loosened, and many famous names of samurai culture who were born into other classes of Japan's very strict class system, Yes, let's not forget that Japan operated for centuries under an unfair and burdensome class system, were able to make a name for themselves as warriors and become sort of a de facto samurai. It was also during this period that military leader Oda Nobunaga laid down military reforms and tactics that would later help to unify Japan under one government. And his two greatest followers, Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu, would continue in his name after Nobunaga's assassination to form the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603, which would rule until 1868. During this time, it was codified into law that non-samurai could not carry any weapons and that the position of samurai was hereditary and permanent, so reinforcing military domination of the underclass. Did this bring about peace? Of fucking course not. The Tokugawa would attempt a military invasion of Korea and China. Military sizes would be cut in order of their leaders, and leaderless samurai would become a social problem, and samurai everywhere became more scholars than warriors, spending time as bureaucrats, courtiers, and administrators. Yes, they still had the right to kill peasants who did not show respect, but it is unknown if or how often this was used. But eventually, after centuries of war, Japan was at peace, at least until 1853 when the U.S. Navy showed up. Under Commodore Matthew Perry, the U.S. forced Japan to open trade with the West, which until then was a mostly forbidden during the Tokugawa shogunate due to Portuguese influences of Catholicism saying God was more powerful than the emperor and powerful guns, and the US and the French starting to modernize Japan to fit Western standards, not beneficial for the people of Japan standards. With such a change, the government of Japan began to experience upheaval once again. Rebellions against the peace of the oppressive pseudo-military government, as well as the American influence, began again. And the last showing of the samurai is when Tom Cruise white saviored us into a new era of Thetan enlightenment with Scientology. Wait, what? That never happened? Well, shit. What really happened is that the last of the samurai, traditional samurai wars occurred in the 1868 year during the Boshin War, as a group of ostracized samurai attempted to seize the failing power of the Tokugawa shogunate, but lost to the combined forces of the Tokugawa imperialism, U.S. and French involvement in government politics, and the changing tides of modernization. The wearing of the traditional sword and armor were later outlawed in 1876, and the last of the samurai rebellion occurred a year later in 1877, when the main leader of those rebellions was shot and mortally wounded, and the last holdouts of the samurai were hopelessly crushed, effectively ending the samurai as we know it historically. Like I said, that's the short version. Samurai tradition would still hold in Japan even through the 1900s, when many Japanese soldiers would carry traditional family weapons into battle, both in their conquest of China in the late 1930s and later during World War II through much of the 1940s, where the ideas of the Bushido, samurai tactics, and the ideas of Zen Buddhism, to sacrifice all and not fear death, would carry many troops into battle with the US and its allies, but mostly with the US. Even the most famous kamikaze pilots had taken their name from the so-called divine wind that had helped defeat the Mongols century before. We're getting there, I promise. But it turns out samurai battle logic and Zen Buddhism completely crumples really fucking quickly in the face of two atomic bombs, proving for the first time ever that thoughts and prayers don't do jack shit when faced with real problems. However, the idea of the samurai persisted in Japanese popular culture, most famously in the movies of acclaimed director Akira Kurosawa, and Japanese manga and anime. Those would soon bleed into the US during the late 1970s and most definitely the 1980s, when it was believed Japan was headed towards economic global superiority, a superiority that we in the US kind of forced them into when we restructured the Japanese government to best fit the United States and introduce capitalism on a large scale, which Japan arguably went on to perfect, plus adding all sorts of USA-based government corruption, and its influences on popular culture, such as samurai-type logic showing up as a foundational part of cyberpunk writing, Western corporations seeking to adopt the quote unquote Asian business model for endless and unconquered success, kung fu and karate becoming bywords for dangerous and cool at strip malls and cinemas across the land, and of course, showing up in video games. So yeah, I had to tell you that whole fucking story to tell you this one. If you're still here, congratulations, you have good taste. Ghost of Tsushima is a very Western game, made by developer Sucker Punch Studios and published by Sony, a very Japanese owner. It was also very much influenced by Kurosawa films and media like manga and Western interpretations of samurai media like Usagi Yojimbo, and, for my money, the most faithful fucking adaptation of traditional samurai in modern media. Remember, things like Ninja Scroll and Samurai Champloo are very Japanese productions and use a lot of samurai themes. But if you want to argue those are somehow more correct than Ghost of Tsushima in its presentation, then go fuck yourself off a cliff and die. But let's get into it. Ghost of Tsushima stars a young samurai warrior named Jin Sakai, working under the lordship of his uncle Lord Shimura. And Jin is the last survivor of Clan Sakai. The year is 1274, and the Mongol Empire invades the island of Tsushima, spearheaded by our antagonist for the game, Khotun Khan, cousin to the more famous Kublai Khan, who is grandson of Genghis Khan. The first person to yell Khan in a William Shatner voice is the winner here. Jin and Lord Shimura lead the island's samurai against the Mongols, but it ends badly, with the Mongols winning the battle, capturing Shimura and all of Tsushima Island, killing most of the samurai, and leaving Jin for dead. Jin is rescued by Yuna, a thief and warrior, who nurses him back to enough health for him to claim his weapon, a katana before the katana was ever a thing, and escape to the countryside to plot revenge after Khotun beats his ass for a second time in 48 hours. At this point, I should note Ghost is not trying to be historically accurate. If you sat through my history lesson, the samurai were barely a thing in 1274, and the katana would not actually be a common weapon of the samurai until the 1600s, almost 400 years later. It is a samurai game in spirit, using familiar trappings for modern players to ultimately tell a compelling story of one man's choices in seeking honor and trying to defend his home and his people, to whom he feels responsible. Ghost is also an open-world collectathon, where the player, in the guise of Jin, quests all over an admittedly very large open-world island, destroying Mongol outposts, finding bamboo posts to cut to increase his resolve, the ability to heal mid-combat and perform special moves he gains later, worshipping at fox shrines, collecting goods to power up his weapons and armor, and learning new skills that the samurai feel are dishonorable but may be necessary to get rid of the Mongols, an army that fights without honor as far as it is known or understood. Along the way, Jin seeks to gain the help of the last remaining defenders of Tsushima, Yuna and her blacksmith brother Taka, female samurai and family friend Lady Masako Adachi, renowned master of the bow Sensei Ishikawa, merchant and con artist Kenji, and Buddhist warrior monk Norio. And this is much of the story structure of Ghost of Tsushima comes in from in between the self-directed collecting missions. Jin himself is a noble and idealistic young man, faced with the impossible task of trying to save his home from invaders, who then plan to go to the mainland Japan to invade. Jin is also a complex figure. He is shamed that he was not able to save his father during a battle where he was a teenager, where he witnessed his father die while begging for his help. He feels obligated to his uncle, who has adopted him as his ward, and would like to officially make Jin his son, but he is also conflicted, as his uncle is a very strong-willed man, who has his principles and is willing to die fighting a losing battle against a foe who cares nothing for the rules of battle or strict codes of honor. Again, not historically accurate, as the code of the Bushido would not be formalized until long after the events of this game. When Jin is learning new things to try and save everyone, and he, as a lord of the island, is obligated to his people, who are dying left and right. Sucker Punch did an excellent job humanizing Jin, when they could have easily made him a comic book superhero with a sword, which would have been a shit show if they did this. I like Jin. despite the fact that I had to see his ass multiple times every time he got into a healing spring to increase his health. I'm just not into that. But otherwise, Jin is a good dude. This complex nature extends to his allies, and spoilers ahead for this fairly recent game. Sensei Ishikawa is a man haunted by his choices to give his greatest secrets and possibly adopt a peasant girl who may have been the greatest archer of her generation, but who he fucked up that relationship with to the point the woman takes his teachings to the Mongols to train them to better kill peasants. But when the Mongols get done with her, she tries to get Jin on her side to see things her way that Ishikawa is in fact a shitty guy who was a bad adoptive father. And Ishikawa may in fact agree with that. Lady Masako just wants to avenge her family, slaughtered by another clan. And her love of her dead kids is what drives her blindly and recklessly forward, until we learn that the real love of her life, one of her handmaids, helped sell out the whole clan, and that her sister, who hated her for what she felt was Masako selling her into slavery to a drunken, abusive clan leader to keep the Adachi clan leader to herself. Masako even temporarily turns on Jin until they can come to terms with this blind rage. Kenji is a con artist with a heart and a complex motive set and no skill as a warrior, but he deeply loves his home and uses his fast talk skills to help defeat the Mongols. Norio is another conflicted man, as his brother is a hero of the Buddhist temple, but he is not, and is supposed to be a pacifist, but he is obviously not. And when his lost brother turns up, butchered by the Mongols, Norio loses his shit and feels he can no longer return to the monastery until Jin helps convince him otherwise. And last but not least is Yuna, a peasant woman who early on teaches Jin how to be sneaky and slays without honor, the first steps on the way to becoming the ghost. And it is just using Jin to save her brother and get off the island. But Taka is so enamored by the samurai that he wants to stay and help, and this causes Yuna to stay as well, long after she wanted to. This love of the samurai eventually leads to Taka's death, and Yuna getting revenge on everyone she felt put Taka in this position. But she and Jin become close as the story moves on, possibly even a romantic relationship. But this never comes to fruition as I expected, and thank God it didn't. That is perhaps one of the most historically accurate things about this game, where love between peasant and nobility is forbidden. Perhaps the least complex players in this action melodrama are Lord Shimura and Khoten Khan. Shimura is a samurai through and through, and when Jin rescues him halfway through the game, we really see the friction between Jin and his uncle begin as word of Jin's dishonorable methods of killing Mongols makes Shimura sad and angry, and he begins demanding that Jin return to the path of honor before he has to take drastic measures. This relationship breaks entirely when Jin decides to start using poison against the Mongols, when Shimura sees this as an act of terrorism, again, modern interpretation of the samurai, and refuses to allow it. This is hilarious, as the real samurai lords were not against poisoning their enemies, just as long as the samurai were not doing it. That's why the dishonorable warrior class, the ninja, were retained. And this is really what is at the heart here in Ghost of Tsushima. Jin is becoming the first ninja, or dishonorable warrior working in secret for his clan lord, and the chain of decisions Jin makes to make his home, clan, and love of family versus hatred of his invaders. Khoten Khan is just a cardstock villain, there to drive the story and do dastardly things, make threats, murder the defenseless, poison people, and the like. He is the least complex and most unchanging character in this period drama. The most character arc he has is when Jin turns him from a living threat to a dead body. But we didn't really come here to see a villain arc involving Khoten Khan. We came to see Jin's villain arc. Or at least villain, as the culture Sucker Punch borrowed from. Jin, despite all of this, retains his nobility, mostly, I think, because he's a video game character. Again, in the historic sense, the Mongols attempted to invade Japan twice. both times being repelled by a combination of bad planning and powerful storms that allowed the meager by comparison forces of the samurai to turn the tide against them, enough that the Mongols decided it was pointless to continue when they were having such good fortune conquering everything from Korea to damn near what we now know as Moscow in modern Russia. Japan just wasn't worth it. It was during both of these invasions, under the very real Kublai Khan in 1274 and 1281, that the famed divine wind, sudden typhoons that came to be called the kamikaze, happened, and due to the spread of Zen Buddhism, causing the samurai to think the intervention was divine rather than a complete meteorological accident. And this term was later adopted by Japan's suicide pilots during World War II. That led to generations of belief that somehow Japan and the samurai were unbeatable and ordained by the gods. We see the theme of powerful storms, rain, and wind crop up again and again throughout Jin's journey, and Sucker Punch at least nods to how the Mongols are not succeeding as fast due to the weather. Now, outside of this, there is a major inaccuracy introduced in the character of Ryuzo and his Straw Hat Ronin. Don't get me wrong, these guys are cool, and Ryuzo is a powerful plot character as Jin's childhood friend who wanted to be a samurai but couldn't because of class restrictions, and who turns on Jin and his allies with the Mongols to finally get his, what he feels is, due respect for his skills. But the Ronin themselves were not introduced in a problem in real life until almost the 1700s, when the Tokugawa cut military forces to keep rebellions down. But again, we aren't aiming for history here. We are aiming for an amazing story, which the play of Jin and Ryuzo, a man Jin could have been if the situation was reversed, against each other is absolutely brilliant. But Ghost of Tsushima is, as I said earlier, an open world game whose plot points can be tackled in any order. Therefore, it is impossible to do a linear plot breakdown, so the Cliffs Notes version I provided will have to do, dear listener. But really, I must discuss the ending, so spoilers ahead. After everything that Jin has done, mistakes he's made, hard-won principles he's had to cast aside, and the life he knew of duty and honor forcibly ripped away and left behind to face an enemy who knows or cares for none of those things. Making allies of undesirables and seeing the quote-unquote honorable people of samurai culture turn out to be complex and not all that nice or worthy of the honor they claim to possess, Jin adopts his new persona as the Ghost, the terror of the Mongols and the hidden savior of Tsushima and her people. Someone the peasants love, but who the Emperor of Japan has declared an outlaw for showing the peasants that they can disobey their betters and stand up to authority, which is anathema to any authoritarian culture, ours included. And if you think the US isn't fast becoming a fully returning to openly racist, woman-hating, other-fearing Christian corporate-run authoritarian nation, wanting desperately to return to the us versus them days of Jim Crow and the Cold War, then you really need to stop listening to my show and go find some other person to get your jollies from. I hear Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan are always looking for dumb as shit meatheads to join their cause. Anyway, Jin must die because the ghost, as he is, has become a symbol of strength and something the underclass can rally around instead of the state, who will gladly see them killed as a necessity and no great loss. And sadly, Lord Shimura very much believes in that state and all it represents, despite what he has just lived through. That is the end of Ghost of Tsushima. The conflict between honor and dishonor in a culture where it is paramount. The conflict of state authority versus the will of the people. And we know so often the state wins in such conflicts. And Lord Shimura must kill Jin personally to redeem his honor and the honor of his clan. But do not think ill of Shimura. He is truly a good man, put into an impossible situation himself. Jin disobeyed for his own good intentions and reasons, and it is unlikely they would have won against the Khan otherwise. Shimura just wanted Jin to be his son and continue Clan Shimura now that he is old. But Jin, being on the path of the ghost, has made that impossible, and the Emperor is sending his new samurai to rule over Tsushima Island. Although I could see what was coming, I was invested, and I kept begging the game not to pit Jin against his uncle. I liked Shimura too. I understood his motives, as uncomplicated as they were. Sucker Punch did a great job here too. But in the end, Jin has one final duel after all the duels for magic powers and honor he has had. Fight his uncle in a one-on-one battle at the grave of Jin's father and Shimura's brother. And the end, you have one final choice. Slay your uncle for honor, or let him live. This may be controversial, but I let Lord Shimura live, despite it being the supposed honorless path. Not because I wanted to ruin Shimura, but because I could see the man underneath, torn and devastated by the war. His demand by his own lord to kill his last relative, a man who watched the boy he helped raise to adulthood go his own way and against his wishes, like any parent who sees their child grow up into something they did not expect and cannot accept for whatever reason. Lord Shimura was sad, broken, and lost. But also, death would have been the easy way out. So no, Uncle Shimura, you get to live and learn to deal. And if you take your own life, that's on you. Like Jin, we do not kill family just because they don't understand who we have become and whether that family likes it or not. It is better to walk away in those situations, like Jin did. The last act, for me, solidified Jin as one of the best samurai in fiction, and Ghost of Tsushima as one of the most epic and brilliant games I personally have ever played. Now, I understand why Sucker Punch made the choices and aesthetics that they did. They knew damn well they were being historically inaccurate, but they were going for what was easily recognizable outside of Japan, such as weapons and armor, haikus, and ronin, and other things more recognizable during Japan's later periods. So, of course, I get it, and I'm not making it or marking it against them, just pointing them out for people who may not know. Everything else in the narrative and the character development Sucker Punch nailed, and it is obvious that Akira Kurosawa's hand has been guiding Sucker Punch throughout in spirit. May he rest in peace. Jin Sakai is also named in honor of the Japanese-American cartoonist Stan Sakai, creator of Usagi Yojimbo, best known as the Rabbit Samurai who teamed up so often with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, at least for me anyway, and who has influenced the team. The world of Ghost is just so beautiful. A Japan that was seen through the eyes of the expressionists of Europe, a grand digital painting by Claude Monet. It was a wonder just to sit quietly in the God rays, watching the world around you. And of course, the chance to pet foxes was something I took at every opportunity. I mean, fuck the critics on this review. Folks, you know damn good and well, most everybody in the game review space loved it and gave it 9s out of 10s all the time. Which is amazing again, considering it came out during the dark days of the COVID-19 lockdown and the awful year 2020 was. And yeah, there are a few pedantic critics who didn't like the combat because it didn't suit them or felt the story was wooden and trope filled. Yet again, I say turn to anime, you slack-jawed assholes, which I'm fucking sure is the only experience you had in the game's press out of interacting with Japanese culture besides office business trips to Japan to get drunk and talk about video games through interpreters. And I dare you to say that isn't full of tropes when it's not an acid-fueled nightmare, you fucks. And apparently, the depiction of Mongols as invaders stirred up nationalist pride in China, who see them as not that for some reason I don't understand, considering how many times China has invaded its neighbors throughout its history, like, the Mongols did. Jesus, it's like when telling someone the pre-Civil War South was not a good place for black Americans, and that the Civil War is not about states' rights. You'll get to see some nationalistic fervor get stirred up and see a whole bunch of shitty bad takes. You also get to see who in your family are the real pieces of shit. I'm sure the same thing happened in China, but, with a lot more state and military suppression. But otherwise, Ghost of Tsushima was one of those golden games that everyone raves about, and rightly so. The game is, as I have said, fucking brilliant. Long have passed the days when I was one of those young Americans impressed by the idea of what the samurai stood for and seemed cool to. As I've gotten older, I have come to realize they were an oppressive military regime like any other, like the Romans or the Russians or the Khmer Rouge or the military industrial complex we worship today. That they were people taking orders from corrupt, poor leaders just to get through the day to day, because that's what we do and have done for centuries. Long past the times I felt honor was a necessary part of life and something we lost along the way, because I learned the hard way that we as a society and a people never had any honor. Honor, like justice or fairness, being one of the big lies, as late author Terry Pratchett once wrote, further saying, and I admit I am paraphrasing and modifying his original statement here with my own words, that we as kids need to believe in the little lies like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, so that we can grow up to believe the big lies that keep our society going and keep us from completely breaking down, destroying ourselves, because at the heart of it, we are selfish comfort monkeys who just want to be left alone, even the most social among us. So honor, as much as we talk it up, and some people claim to have it through valor or some other made up horse shit, gets put in the pantheon of big lies. And if it is dishonorable to spare the life of someone who is wrong, out of touch, and who doesn't want to live in a world where they are wrong, well, that's just too bad. No, the real value of Ghost of Tsushima, for me, is not only in the moment by moment storytelling, but in the final moment, where I, a jaded old fuck who's more than happy to tell people to suck shit on a routine basis because they deserve it and need to hear it, got to believe that honor might be real. That our better natures might, on occasion, win out in impossible circumstances. And that a precious few can actually make the difference for the betterment of the whole, even if for a little while and with unconventional methods in a society stuck in the past and done. No, Ghost of Tsushima is not solely a Japanese tale. It is a story for all of us to believe in that sometimes old ways are old and out of touch for a reason, and a reminder that no person is an island in the face of tough times. It is a story of banding together with people different than you to accomplish a goal and form a family of sorts. And the fact that we need this reminder and lesson over and over says more about us as a modern society than it ever did about ancient societies and people depicted in times long, long past. And for that moment, where I got to live in the game world and believe, even for a second, that honor was real, was worth every penny of the price of admission. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, and Mass Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.